Hey, Grub.
Good morning.
Morning. Are you East Coast or Central?
East. We're in Ohio.
Oh, Ohio. That's good. Morning, Michael.
Good morning.
This screen sharing and Zoom always throws me off because I've got like the browser open on a different window, but the like hidden Zoom controls are over on the other screen. It's like, wait, where's everything?
And it's awesome that every video tool is slightly different.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. It is awesome. Today is my first day actually getting the OpenSSF operations account to work for this thing. I did not realize I had to admit everybody to this meeting. Oh man, all the work I have to do. Give folks a few more minutes here.
By the way, unless there's objections, particularly Michael Scavetta, I intend to talk about Alpha Omega next week. And hey, that it's a proposal and likely to become a real thing. So
Absolute no, sorry, pre-coffee. Yes, please. Thank you.
if it's a secret, you've done a terrible job.
Yeah, I know Phil said he can't make it today, and Ralph said he's got a conflict with the first half, so he might come after. And SEK is in the document, but not in the meeting. We will give her 1 minute. And I think Jennifer said she was going to try to join too. So we'll do the classic Microsoft technique. We'll start at 5 after.
It's not just Microsoft, trust me.
Well, if you start 5 minutes after, but then you have the additional 10 minutes of, can you hear me? You can't, and the video doesn't work. And
Back when we were all in person, yeah, there was a good solid 10 to 15 minutes every single meeting of, can we get the projector to work? And oh, they've upgraded this conference room, so it's different than the other 3 that we've been using for the past 6 months.
I've got Dan Lawrence on Slack here, and he's looking like he can't make the meeting.
Oh, okay.
And we were just discussing. So the vote, will that take place over email or on the meeting?
Well, that for the Alpha Omega,
Yes.
I was anticipating that we would do it in the meeting, but we are missing a few key folks.
Sure.
So we probably end up doing it either email, or in the past, we've done it, via GitHub issues as well, just to track it a little bit easier and a little bit more publicly. So most
Okay.
likely that'll be the route we head.
Okay,
Unless-
yeah. He said that I was expecting them to kick it off over email. So
Okay, I could kick off over email with a
I
link.
don't mind the medium. That's fine. I'm just clarifying for Dan.
Yeah, no worries. All right, with that, it is 8:05. And so quick agenda today. So as Luke mentioned, we're going to talk about Project Alpha Omega. And Mike has some updates there as far as the funding and how we want to go about that. So we want to talk about the approval process for that. So if you guys kind of, as a refresher, the TAC, we're not explicitly approving budget, but we do have to sort of make a recommendation to the governing board and say, yeah, we think this is a good idea. And then the governing board actually goes through and approves the budget officially. And then we're going to talk about the election process that we briefly touched on last week and how we want to do that. We did 2 weeks ago. We did discuss around postponing the elections that would have been happening right about now until November when the new governing board is in place. And so we can go ahead and do that. And in the meantime, we need to develop what exactly that official process is going to look like. And then finally, Kay is going to talk about a new project called SCIM, which is part of the supply chain integrity. And with that, Mike, do you want to kick it off? Do you have a presentation or?
I do not. I was just going to kind of chat through this, and no, Dan suggested that this meeting be used more as a brainstorming than an actual funding ask. I'm okay with whatever you guys need. So I think everybody here has seen the doc, and I think most of you have commented in the doc, and thank you for that. And yeah, I guess what I'd like to most use this time for is, are there any fundamental objections, or is there anything that we can't work through, in short order to align things, to everyone's kind of.
Can I jump in for
Absolutely.
a second to set some context?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that might be helpful. So at the governing board level, there are two ways that projects can be funded, and this is something we've discussed a bunch at the governing board level. Those ways are: the project can be funded only from, actually three ways, only from OpenSSF funds, only from outside funds, but for projects that are aligned with the OpenSSF mission. And then the third way is through some combination of outside funding and OpenSSF funding. For the projects where the funding is outside funding, the path that we have agreed to follow is to have the TAC indicate that the project is in alignment with, something that the TAC supports, and that is in alignment with the vision, technical vision set by the TAC. And then, so long as it's in alignment, then it would go to the next level, which is the governing board. And the governing board would approve the project as something that could be could be requested for outside funding. So what the TAC is needing to do is not to approve the funding ask, or at this point, it's not even necessary that the project be fully buttoned up. I think that there will probably be some changes that come along. The main thing is for the TAC to say, yes, this is something that aligns with our vision and something that we'd like to see move forward to funding. The second thing that I wanted to share, kind of big topic that I wanted to share, is that right now is a really, there is some time sensitivity for this. Right now is a really great time for us to define a big project like this and showcase it. There will be some upcoming announcements about OpenSSF, and I'm not sure if all of you know, we've made some fairly big changes at the governing board level. In our first year at OpenSSF, we didn't have any membership dues. And the major change that we just made to our charter, and this will be going out to all of our members, is that we are switching to I'll call it a funded model. So we'll be asking for member dues, and we have 2 tier levels. We have the premier level, and for those members at that level, they'll be contributing $250,000 per company. And then at the general member level, those members will be contributing between $5,000 and $20,000, depending on the size of the organization. So we'll be making a public announce of this change in our OpenSSF structure. And along with that, we'd love to, have some announcements about, again, big projects that we're doing. So we're saying, okay, and here's what's happening, and here's why you want to be participating in this organization. So, what you might imagine is that we make the announcement about here's the change in our member dues. Here's here's a big project, and maybe even, and I'm just throwing this out, we haven't decided this yet, but maybe we say something like, and for any of our members that sign up to the premier level ahead of the announcement of Project Alpha Omega, we'll put their names in the announce. So then that could be used as a way to get more enthusiasm from potential new premier members to join the organization. So that's the context, and that's not to try to rush this if people feel like it needs more time, but if there's general alignment behind this and the TAC can say, yep, this is something that we want to move forward, that'd be fantastic. The timing specifically would allow us to, if a decision could be made today or soon, then that timing would allow us to bring forth a proposal to the governing board at our next meeting, which is October 5th. So I think it's October 5th, the first Thursday in October.
Kay?
Yeah.
Is there any reason we have to wait for a governing board formal meeting for this?
No, of course not. We could, if it takes longer here and we.
I'm thinking the reverse. If there's general consensus here and the TAC says, yeah, governing board, please go. I would seriously entertain, do it electronically with the governing board and get and go.
Yeah, that's totally a possibility as well. The governing board hasn't actually talked through the project, so I think that they might prefer to have a chance to have Mike present it and talk through it. But
Okay.
But I get your point.
Yeah, I don't want to create delays if there's no need for them.
Yep, agree.
That would be ideal. Yes.
So it's Luke here. So the main aspect for myself, and this was discussed. Several parties chipped in on this around in the document, is that really we do some due diligence to see if the critical projects would actually be receptive to this in the first place.
So
that's the main consideration for myself, is that we really sort of test the water to see if they're receptive to this process, to having somebody placed into their team. And
Can I speak to that specifically? Because I have direct experience with this particular issue.
I do too. I mean, I've done 2 critical projects. 3 projects. I've been heading up the security vulnerability management process. So I'm not just saying this off the cuff here.
Yeah,
my
my
experience that head up OpenSSL, Apache, so all in sort of security leadership roles. So this is coming from experience.
Got it. And I'm coming at it from the experience of the CII, where
Sure.
we actually did. It's not identical, but it's similar in the sense of here's money, here's people. Let's go and work with the existing maintainers. And I think the short answer is it depends. The standard
Yeah,
lawyer
sure.
answer, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The
You know, they might well be very receptive to this. If that's the case,
Right.
the
Well,
book's closed
some
for them,
might
but-
and others might not.
Right.
It's not a.
Sure, but I think it's prudent to do some due diligence, considering this is a very large scoped project. I mean, if you were to
Well, I think
bootstrap
that
this and then there's a
something-
kickback, then
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, I definitely agree with that. Like, and I think the structure of the project should be that acknowledging that some projects are absolutely going to say no or not want the help. And, you know, the nature of the project is not dependent on any one specific open source project. You know, like there's a list, right? So we have to be able to iterate through that list. And I think what we
Sure.
want to do here is just approve the overall concept with the acknowledgement that yes, that some folks are probably going to say no, right? But yeah, but I agree that we should do that due diligence of trying to engage with them, seeing what the best model might be, make some recommendations, you know, that sort of thing.
And so, I mean, in
Conversation
everybody's
starter.
in everybody's experience here, like, how often does this occur? Like, if you had to guess, out of 100 projects, do you think that 95 of them are going to say no, get out of here, we don't want your help, or would 5 do it, or somewhere in the, like, you know, because if it's 95 that tell us to, you know, that they don't want anything to do with us, then strategically, I think alpha is Mr.
no,
I find that really hard to
of course,
believe.
yeah.
So
95 is going to be, obviously that's going to be too high a hurdle to reach. But if you perhaps shortlisted your 10 critical projects,
Mhm.
okay, like these are the ones that we are really going to cause pain. Okay, these are the projects that absolutely have to have help, and then spoke to them to see how receptive the community were to this. You know,
Yep.
It just makes sense to me.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, you find a problem and then a solution. It's
So Luke, just to clarify real quick, are you saying that you'd prefer that we do that due diligence before approving the project completely, or just as a next step?
the former. It makes sense to be.
so
Let's
what kind of
let's make sure
acknowledgement?
we have a painkiller here and not a supplement.
What kind of and I think I mentioned this in the doc, like, would a so if we shortlisted 5, 10, pick a relatively small number of projects, reached out to a representative for each of them and said, hey, this is the concept that we're proposing through OpenSSF. If we were to do this and we could offer these kinds of services, would you be amenable in principle to working with us?
Yeah. I mean, it
they
would be
said,
wrong
sure.
of me if communities are saying absolutely we need this. It
Mhm.
would be wrong of me to object to that. Certainly, you see what I mean? It's just I just always think that's the pragmatic way here. Really, is to make sure there is actually a demand here.
Right.
On paper, there appears to be, but it's. You know, I mean, I'm not sort of. You know, this is the same barometer I run for my own projects. We take Sigstore, for example. We spoke to Kubernetes, kernel team, Node.js. You know, we did a fair amount of, albeit stealth, but we spoke to various communities to gauge, would you be receptive to this? Or is there some objections that you have, or is there, you know, if we sort of, is there aspects to this that we've not foreseen that, you know, you believe are important? So it's just due diligence, really.
The current OpenSSF members represent lots of large orgs. You, Luke, and Mark and others represent large, or are strongly affiliated with what I would call critical open source projects. Anyway, can we shortcut this a bit by having OpenSSF members that already have that hat represent that project? Like, could you, like,
I mean, I can only speak for Kubernetes here. I mean, I would certainly be happy to take it to the Kubernetes security response team. but it's, yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know how much coverage we have at the moment. The other one is OpenSSL, which is Mark Cox.
Right.
But yeah, that would be a decision that's within that community. I mean, those members
Right.
can't make
Mhm.
an autonomous decision for that community.
Could ask
So-
it.
Oh, go ahead. Duncan.
Oh, thanks. So first off, I love the alpha omega idea. So I'm a big fan in general of what's been proposed here. One question I have for you, Luke, is you're talking about something we do have to be very mindful of, which is maintainers' receptiveness to the project, especially the alpha piece of the project. I guess my question would be, do we feel that this would be like a fundamental, foundational opposition that they would have to getting security help in general? Or is it that we need to just see if they are finding the specific way we want to help palatable? Because I think like the big picture idea that Michael is advancing here is that the critical projects that need to become more secure, we contribute in ways that help them become more secure. Are you worried that they are going to not want any involvement from like the security world? Or is it just a matter of like the details of how we execute giving that assistance?
No specific scenario comes to mind here. I mean, you might find you get a very much a mixed bag around the reactions.
Mhm.
Some communities do very much shun any sort of what they see as an intervention. They want to manage it themselves, and they prefer that instead companies hire developers and get them to work within that technology upstream. If you see what I mean? And whereas others may be very receptive to this. So you know, there is no, I have no big alarm bells going off. I've just, from my experience, I found that it's always better to speak to the communities first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
One other thought I'll mention here, and I forget if Michael has it in the proposal directly, but we've also talked about companies getting involved, hiring people and getting involved as a way to approach this. So there's no the proposal itself is very flexible, and in fact, Michael outlines a kind of a 4-month period where we do this investigation, where we go out and we talk with communities and we understand what it is they need, and then we come up with specific details that meet the needs of those communities. So I really like the question that Michael asked earlier, which is do we need to do that all of that research work up front, or can we leave the proposal as outlined, which is that the proposal says we will do that research, and we'll get some staff together to help us do that research, and at the same time we can move forward with the Omega side.
Yeah, that wouldn't make so much sense to me, is to actually take on staff to research something that you haven't validated as being a demand for. Don't get me wrong, I think there may well be, and it's chances certain communities will be receptive to this. It's just some prudent due diligence, really, just to get the initial feedback.
Yeah, and it's a valid point. And I think
these projects can be very, how to put this, they can see a lot of things, even if they have good intentions, they can see it as corporate meddling. Okay, and so it's, I say this just as much as a helpful piece of advice. I'm not slamming down the bricks here and saying, there's no way this can happen or go ahead. I think philosophically it's good. I think you have good intentions. It's just, I think that due diligence is a prudent thing to do.
Yeah, and finding a way to do that where it's pretty transparent and where we're showing the respect that we have for maintainers, because it's their project and not ours, is really important. Now, on the note of the alpha piece, I mean, we would be all in a wonderful position if we ran out of critical projects to secure. Like if we wanted to do 100 and maybe 20 turned it down and we did 80 and we couldn't find 20 more things that were important enough to secure in the alpha phase, like the world would be a much better place if that's the position we were in. So like, I think the validation is important so that we are respecting maintainers, being community oriented, building trust, doing all the things that we need to do to make meaningful contributions that aren't just us storming in and asserting things. So I agree on all of that. But I mean, I think that even if a relatively high percentage were to turn down the support for one reason or another, maybe they're just too busy right now, we could always go a little further down on the list because there are still a lot of important projects. Like if we tried to do 50 or we tried to do 100, I think we'd find that items 101 to 200 on the list are also pretty important. So even if people were to turn it down, I imagine that we could just keep moving down that list and still having a lot of really good impact, as long as they're turning it down for the right reasons, not because they think that we're fundamentally flawed, but maybe because of logistics or whatever.
Yeah, and you might find over time they change that position when they see other projects. But I'd say, you know, if you came up with, if you found a group of 5 projects that were absolutely, when can you start? We need your help. You've got a solid case then. Do you see what I mean? There's a demand, you have a supply, you know, it makes sense then, you know, it would.
Yeah, so that's what
projects and communities are saying, we want this, then to object, that would be wrong. It would, you know.
Yeah, as a way to move forward, I think maybe what the best approach would be, we could kind of have a vote on, do we all agree that this is a good thing to go do? And then there's sort of a clause in the vote that says, if we find 5 or more critical projects that are amenable to having work with, then yes, I approve. Otherwise, we don't approve, right? So that way we can say it sort of hinges on the due diligence happening, and then we don't have to wait 2 to 4 weeks or however long it's going to take before we then have to bring it back and then have another vote. So do we want to do something like that so that we can kind of keep in principle moving?
If I could just raise one kind of question before we go into that, just because I have one that's might affect the resource estimate we need for the project.
Yeah.
So on the alpha, like in general, I'm a massive fan of this proposal. Like, to be exquisitely clear, I think this is brilliant. I love the entire concept, and I really love how you've broken it down, Michael, and like the PM support so that it'll actually get done. And like, there's a lot of really great things about this. One question I did have was around the alpha piece. So securing critical projects and trying to get the level of security as high as possible, especially in those alpha projects, is my view of what the goal of the alpha piece of this is. But when we look at the resourcing, it looks like under the execution piece, we talk about the security research and analysis being about triaging findings from scanning and doing fixes based on that. But there's going to be stuff that wouldn't necessarily be found through scanning. I'm wondering, should we be thinking about inserting budget or partnering with a different part of OpenSSF or beyond that's doing like security auditing to make a bit more comprehensive the testing that we're doing of those alpha projects? And maybe this is just me like
Mike, you're
too much.
So thank you for that. In the alpha section, you said that there was the part on triaging vulnerability reports. Like the intent of that was that's minimized in alpha, and alpha is more about the process and the project and the relationships and building the tissue and all that stuff, as well as doing kind of let's say a security audit, like the kinds of things that, you know, NCC or Trail of Bits or OSTF would do. Omega is more about the throw all the tools, triage the results, and kind of, you know, assembly line it out to a fix.
Okay.
But it's a Venn diagram. There's a bit of it in the middle. We wouldn't, for instance, like not run automated tools on alpha projects,
yeah, sure,
for any reason.
Totally.
But just, you know, there would be likely fewer of that for alpha projects.
Okay, so we're thinking like Omega would be tooling driven and we would have headcount to actually remediate bugs, not just find bugs.
Yes.
And then for Alpha, is it more about getting them up to like best practices, badge gold stuff, like helping them create security policies and things like that, but not necessarily like doing security audits or anything that's that in depth?
I think it's actually both. What it is in Alpha, you go and you say, what do you need? Like, help me understand your security posture.
Mhm.
These are some gaps that we see. Do you agree? Can we help you? Like basically, if they need somebody to shovel rocks for them, we should shovel
Yep.
rocks for them. But the goal is to improve their security posture so that it's sustainable, and also have a third party view if needed in terms of kind of the audit part.
The short answer, I understand, is more investment for the alpha ones.
It's significantly more investment for the alpha ones, or were you saying that we should invest more than?
No.
the document?
It would be more.
It's like 2 orders of magnitude more. For the alpha ones, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think this all sounds awesome. I guess the gap that I'm seeing, and like, of course, full disclosure, I represent a security testing firm, right? But this is not me advancing business interests. This is just me believing in security testing. The gap, the only real gap that I see in this proposal is that if we're providing some level of confidence or assurance around the alpha projects, I think that at some point for many of those, it will involve a security audit, which we haven't really accounted for in the costing of this.
Uh,
I thought you did.
sorry, sorry, the under resources, so under alpha on page, whatever it is, page 7, I guess. 5 million of the 5.5 million. Yeah, 5 of the 5.5 million are, when I say service providers, I mean the folks going in and doing the work.
Mhm.
So everything like the other half a million is overhead and stuff. For that, the deliverable, if you look at under the project level and artifact level,
Yeah.
the artifact level is the security review. So that's, I've come in and looked at OpenSSL 3.0.0 and X.
Cool.
But you might not have called out that we actually were, okay, so you had the dollar amount there, 5 million. Maybe what was missing is the link that that could be done by third-party providers. It doesn't have to be by new staff hired by the Linux Foundation. Is that what you're getting at, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think I just missed that point and it makes a lot more sense now. I just wanted to raise it around the security audits, but if that's been accounted for, I mean, this is a very comprehensive proposal. I really like it.
But if it didn't come across to you, it wouldn't come across to others. So I'll go in and tweak if I need to. But yeah, awesome.
Cool. Sounds great.
Okay, so in interest of time and also, again, moving this vote forward a little bit if we can, how would we like to best proceed with this? Do we want to kind of put that contingency clause in there around approval as far as, ensuring that we've done due diligence and we're able to identify at least X number of projects that we would like to go work on that are actually amenable to getting our support? Or do we want to go do that due diligence and circle back?
I really encourage us to move forward with this. But I'm not a TAC, full disclosure, I'm not a TAC member, but it sounds to me like everyone feels like the direction of this is the right direction, and everyone has the mind that we are, the plan is that we'll talk, and we're not going to force ourselves on any community. We'll talk with those critical projects. If they want help, we'll help. If we don't, we'll move on to the next one. So I would encourage, just from the governing board perspective and kind of the momentum for the community overall, that we consider moving forward just with an understanding that we will do that work, but not make acceptance of it contingent on it.
I would love to go to like, I would love as governing board for us to be able to approve this with like a phase 0 that is like a community feedback phase, that maybe we have, you know, half a page that defines really well what we're going to ask and find out, like how we're going to validate that this is a good fit with project maintainers, and that we can publish that somewhere and make like very transparent what our objectives are and how to give feedback. And as long as we've got that phase and that's a part of the loop before proceeding to phase 1, I guess, I think it's a great idea, and I'd be happy to vote on it anytime.
Yeah, that makes sense to me as well. I think that's a
Yeah.
really good approach.
I think I agree with that. Just to clarify, this is essentially highlighting the top 5, going to them with a specific ask, getting some feedback, reading into what that feedback suggests, and then and then from there you can move to a next stage when you then look at funding and staffing and so forth.
Okay, it sounds like we're all kind of in agreement then. So I'll send out after this meeting an email that we can vote on, and I'll also link to a GitHub issue so that we can have it, publicly as well. But we'll go ahead and move forward with that, and then that way Dan and anybody else that's missing can go ahead and Phil can chime in. Any other objections before, or questions, concerns before we move on? We got a few other topics to cover still today.
If I could just add, if anybody has opinions on what that top 5 should be, please just add it to this doc. I will go after this doc and reach out in as soon as possible to have those very initial discussions, unless you think we should wait for until after governing board to even have that initial reach out. I'm not sure. I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but I'm not sure. It seems like we have multiple carts.
So for Kubernetes, who do you reach out to, given that they have like 36 SIGs or whatever?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
Kubernetes is probably, I imagine there's more that are higher priority than that. So there's 8 vendors with people on the security response team. They've got a bug bounty program, which is financed. And so they've got quite a lot there, really. And I'm just thinking there might be some more.
Well, I would think that you want to target,
projects.
I think you'd like to target the top, 5 SIGs, SIG networking, 6, what are the, because you can't say all Kubernetes.
No, sure.
So I see that we had a comment in the chat about can we move discussion of individual projects offline? I think
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry. Yep.
Agreed.
Yeah. Why don't we do that in an issue or a doc or yeah.
Yep, perfect. Yeah, we can create an issue that people can kind of party on as well and put their list there. Cool. All right. So the next thing that we have that we need to talk about is the election process. And I think this should go fairly smoothly. We've done this in the past, when we initially bootstrapped the TAC, we basically did this over email and sort of self-nominated. And I think there was a form that somebody created that was pretty straightforward. I am not proposing that we do something overly complicated. I think we can kind of leverage the same idea where we can create a form, either Google Forms or something simple where folks can nominate. The real question is who is eligible to make those nominations and who is eligible to be nominated. So I know we have some specific requirements now around governing board versus community elected positions. And so I think for the governing board, I don't know, Kay, if you guys have any opinions about how you would like to go ahead and elect those, but at least for the community side of things, we have some flexibility here about who can be nominated. And I believe it's pretty much open to any OpenSSF member. So are there any thoughts or opinions on how they'd like to proceed with those?
I hadn't given much thought on the governing board side. So if this group has recommendations for that, that's great. Otherwise, Ryan and I, maybe you and I can talk offline and think through that and just propose something to the governing board.
Okay, that's fair. So from the community side, do folks have opinions on how best to run that?
Is it at the nomination phase or the voting phase that it splits off into like community and governing board, because if it's at the nomination phase, I mean, I guess there's more for us to talk about. I'm a big fan of self-nomination as much as possible, that like anyone that's interested can raise their hand, and then we just figure out who is eligible to vote in which of the two election components, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And I believe it is at the nomination phase.
So this would mean that someone would not be able to put themselves forward to run for being on the TAC without being nominated by one of these two groups. And then the voting is also through those groups?
So the voting is through those groups, yes. So my assumption was sort of that with the community side, you could definitely self-nominate. The governing board is kind of where I was a little less clear about how we might go about that.
Sure.
But certainly from the community side, I anticipated self-nomination was going to be the way to go, because I prefer that as well. And certainly we don't want to nominate people that don't want to be here and that don't have an interest. So I suppose on the governing board side, we could provide a recommended list of potentials that the governing board could vote on. I don't know. Okay, I know we said we were going to talk about this a little bit more offline, but I think it's kind of pertinent to
Sure. I don't see any reason why why the TAC couldn't put forward, a list of people who have self-nominated for the governing board to consider.
Do you anticipate that there were going to be requirements on the governing board side as far as who could be, or is it pretty much open like it is right now?
We really have not discussed this. For some groups, the governing board is, nominated sort of representatives from their own communities, and so I guess we'll have to talk through the governing board side of it, and probably the best time to do that is at the November 5th meeting.
Okay.
I would love to see, just because it feels most democratic to me, I would love to see one self-nomination list where anyone that wants to run can join that list and write kind of a candidate statement. And that from there, based on that one centralized list of everybody that wants to be on the TAC, there is the community-driven voting, and there's also the governing board-driven, I don't know if it's voting or if it's like a consensus or how that works, but that maybe it's ranked choice voting, such that the top 4 or whatever people selected by the governing board through whatever that mechanism is, off of that list get the seats, and the top 3 of those remaining get the community seats as voted by us. And I guess by us, I mean by the community, I should be clear. Or some other way of having it that like there's one list, there's 2 groups that are weighing in on that list, and the top X that they're allowed to have are admitted to the TAC. And if there's overlap between those lists, we just go to the next ranked choice person in that list according to the vote.
That sounds like a fantastic proposal to me.
Yep, I agree. I like that a lot.
And I'd be, happy to. So, we'll still need to take it to the board, but I'd be happy to provide support for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think what we'll do is, how about I'll create a GitHub issue detailing exactly that, Jennifer, and I'll make sure I have it correct with you first before I publish it, and then we can send that out as the proposal, and then folks can comment on that if there's further iterations that need to happen.
The one potential issue with that is that previously the TAC had discussed having on alternating years the governing board select, and the other alternating years the community select. So maybe we would want to rethink that alternation and just do the same thing every year. I think having the same process that we followed every year might be a good thing.
Yeah, I think the idea behind the alternating was just to ensure consistency across the council, right? So that we didn't have a complete turnover. But we can still ensure that by saying, okay, maybe 2 community seats and 1 governing board seat, this year, and then the next year it's flipped, kind of thing, so that way we're not completely turning things over. And then we can still do the process that Jennifer described.
The process I see used in.
Oh, sorry,
I
John.
talked over someone. I apologize. The approach I've usually seen to deal with a turnover problem is 2-year terms. So you have half of approximately half, it has to be odd. So it'll be like 3 and 5 or something like that, 3 and 4. Half turns over each year and it's a 2-year term. And then that way, no more than half gets changed at a time. That seems to work pretty well.
Yeah. I think that's actually what we have in the original proposal, but we just split it amongst the governing board community. But yeah, same idea. So perfect.
Yeah,
Okay.
I support the alternation idea that we don't have total turnover year to year or 2 years to 2 years. My main point was that I really like the idea of having one central self-nomination thing where people can put themselves forward, and maybe we provide some kind of template or whatever of how we want them to prepare a statement, so that it's not just, hopefully it's not just who has the most friends on Twitter or whatever, and it's a lot more about the position people take and the contributions they've made, and evening the playing field as much as possible.
I agree. Awesome. Yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll get that created and send that out later today. And then last thing that we have is Kay to talk about the new skin project.
Okay, so there's a project that Microsoft initiated, and we've been holding discussions with a number of community members for several weeks. So we first proposed this immediately following the White House executive order and announcement of the White House executive order on cybersecurity. The members who have been participating include MITRE, Intoto, Fraunhofer, SIT, ARM, and a couple of others. I'm forgetting all of them right now. The project is focused around, so SCIM is the name, it's which stands for Supply Chain Integrity Model. So the basic idea for the project is to define standards around sharing metadata, information about activities in a supply chain with others in end-to-end supply chain. So it's really about kind of visibility of supply chain activities to everyone in the supply chain. It includes defining a store for supply chain metadata, a secure store based on kind of the highest level of security practices, including a confidential ledger for transparency and or a transparency ledger for transparency, and then running in a confidential environment or a trusted execution environment for additional tamper-proofness from the operators of the service. And then so that's at the store level. And then it also defines a format for exchanging data. So if what we want to exchange are software bills of materials and information about testing that's been run on a project and information about build environment of a project, defining common schemas for those things, and then also defining common schemas for policy. So how members across the supply chain can say, I will accept this, this artifact if it meets these requirements and otherwise not. So this project, we've intended from the start for it to move eventually to OpenSSF, and we've been, working to meet the incubation requirements for new projects in OpenSSF, including having at least 5 meetings with at least 5 people representing at least 3 companies, and we've satisfied all of those now. So we would like to propose that we move into OpenSSF. There's one final piece that we're working on. So before we, actually ask for the TAC to vote on this, the final piece that we're working on is there are other projects that are similar in the community, and in particular, Intoto is one, and the Salsa project, which is in OpenSSF, is another one. And we are going to be having some meetings in the next week or two where those groups together have a look at the parts of the different projects and where there's overlap. And it's possible we might decide that it could make sense to combine some of those efforts. So, the last thing before we would move it in would be for us to complete those discussions. And then, we can think about, would we be thinking about moving just Skim in? Would we be thinking about moving, these are just, some examples of where we could go. Would we be thinking about moving Intoto in, and Skim becomes part of, kind of an expansion of what the Intoto community has currently been envisioning. So we're working through that. At this point, I just, wanted to make you aware of the project and what our status is, and that eventually this project or this concept of end-to-end supply chain integrity is something that we're proposing reside in OpenSSF. Any questions on that?
Well, this is really, really cool. Exciting to see. One question, do you anticipate that this would be its own working group, or that it would be working with tooling or best practices or any of the other groups? I think this is it's specific to this initiative, but I think we have this question kind of overarching that the TAC needs to address as well. Particularly Project Alpha Omega is going to run into this as well, where we're starting to have a lot of overlap across groups. And I think that's inevitable considering the nature of supply chain, right? It hits everything. And so we need to, as a group, I think, figure out what is a good model for how to coordinate these efforts and ensure that everybody's kind of working at the same goal. But so with that, did you have any thoughts about how you wanted to handle this particular one?
Yeah, good question. I see it as a separate project that would come in on its own. And so we, in the OpenSSF charter, we describe technical initiatives, which can be projects or they can be working groups. So, and there's nothing in our charter that says every project need be aligned with, one single working group. Mm-hmm. So I had been thinking in it that it would come in as its own project. And then, the project would work across other existing working groups. But I'm not tied to that either. So
I'm just trying to work out, are you so is this a framework, or is it you're going to sort of write a secure supply chain software, or because just when you mentioned Intoto is coming in? And
yeah, so I think it's both. I think there's and Intoto I was just suggesting as something that could happen. So that there are discussions. I'm not saying exactly that will happen, but for Skim, we see that there are two pieces to it. One is that there's a specification that would eventually be an industry that that we would eventually promote as for industry standard adoption. And we've been talking about doing that through the IETF. There are several members of the existing working group that are familiar with the IETF process. So there'd be specifications, but there also would be code. So the data store that we've been talking about would be open source code. And one component of that today is already available as open source code. So there's a core confidential compute implementation that's already available as open source, and then the Skim would be the Skim store would be an application that sits on top of that, and we would look at putting that Skim store application into OpenSSF. So both So there'd be both specification and code and tooling, we imagine over time to create the claims, we call them, that go on to that go into the confidential store, and tooling to support evaluating, using policy tools to write policy, and then tools to verify that the claims meet policy.
I don't have a question. I have a self-aggrandizing speech and reply.
Sure.
I published yesterday, in fact, a little article called Some Requirements for a Universal Asset Graph. And you might find that helpful to mind for expensive ideas.
Okay, great. Already just from the universal asset graph, it sounds like there's synergy between.
Steal that name. No offense. I think it's catchy.
Can you just send the link or post it in chat?
It's not stealing, it's open sourcing.
So for the specification, would it not make sense to leverage Salsa? Because it sounds like we were going to have 2 secure supply chain specification.
You know what, I love it. And that's where I was saying that, you know, it's sort of the last step before, you know, trying to move this in is to talk with the Salsa community and the Entoto community and see, you know, have all of us understand how, you know, how these things fit together. And you know, I'm not determined to create a new community. Maybe what we've been thinking.
Yeah, no, I understand. I guess I'm just trying to establish what the ask is for us now. Is this a kind of
right now? It's just awareness.
Okay, I got you. Okay, yeah, good. Okay, sure.
Just a question. We are introducing some new things. And historically, we haven't really talked about or evangelized the old things super well. I might suggest to the TAC, it might be an awesome idea to put together kind of a reference architecture about what the foundation is working on and kind of a strategic direction to help articulate that to an outsider. Because right now we just appear to be a random confederation of open source enthusiasts wandering around without a lot of structure. So it might be helpful to provide that little bit more structure from the outside observer that's interested in participating.
It's a really good point. In fact, when we were first coming up with the technical vision, I believe that was one of the items that now I'm realizing got dropped, is that we wanted to sort of create this roadmap that showed, here's the technical vision and here's how each one of these working groups / projects fits into that model.
And that also helps you decide on things like the 2 projects we've talked about today. You know, it helps you kind of provide that fits within our vision. Here's how that mentally kind of fits in the big picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to encourage more participation.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic, Crow. And if we had something like that ready, that could be part of our announce in the November timeframe that we're looking at.
I put together a simple diagram. I can't say it's exhaustive, but if anyone wants to poke at it with me, I'm glad to throw that together and schedule some time.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind sharing it, I'd be happy to take a look and maybe help contribute.
Maybe whatever.
I'll get a link out to the list here shortly.
Awesome. Sorry, Jennifer, were you saying something?
Just that whatever comes out of it, we should publish. I know Crow, is this the diagram from the Black Hat talk? Yeah, it would be super useful for us to put this either on the website or on GitHub somewhere easy to reference.
Cool. All right, we got 2 minutes left. We've hit all the topics that were in the document. Is there anything that anyone else would like to mention before we go?
I guess for the election, we need to figure out an actual voting mechanism. Once we define who's voting what, we also need to figure out how they're actually going to do that.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to create just a quick summary before we go. I'll create the GitHub issue that defines the process that you mentioned. And we'll send that out to everybody. I'll also create the issue for voting on the Project Alpha Omega. And then, yeah, if folks have ideas around the voting, I'll try to do some research on that this week as well, that we can add to that GitHub issue discussion. And then we'll kind of get that sorted out hopefully soon. Anything else? All right, well, enjoy your extra minute of the day. We'll see you
All
guys.
right.
Don't spend
Thanks,
it all in one
everyone.
place. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.